Welcome back to a new episode of Telling Our Stories Patient Encounter Pearls edition. This time we're going to do things a little bit differently. Something is happening with my camera. I'm just going to leave it off for a few seconds. So let me introduce myself. My name is Laura. I'm a CPS team member and a 5th-year medical student from Brazil. Today I have a new partner to co-host the session with me, the incredible Umaima. Umaima, would you like to introduce yourself? Umaima, are you there?
Hi, everyone. I think Laura is having some technical issues. So as she said, we will be doing things a little bit differently today. We have a very special guest with us, Dr. Aisha Rehman from Pakistan, who will be sharing a patient story that changed the way she views medicine. And yeah, we can't wait to hear from her. And I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Umaima. I'm from Morocco. This is my final year in medical school. And I joined the CP Solvers team almost a month ago. And I am now working on this special project, Patients Encounter Pearls, alongside Laura. And yeah. Aisha, can you introduce yourself for us, please?
Yes, hello everyone. So my name is Aisha. I'm from Pakistan. I am finished with my internal medicine residency, but I have yet to take my exit exam. So just preparing for that and currently taking a break from working. So Laura reached out to me regarding this, and it has been I enjoy reading about narrative medicine, though I haven't myself participated in any sort of narrative medicine so far. So I'm really excited and I'm really happy to be here, and let's hope it's a productive session.
Hi team, I'm back. I'm sorry, I had a trouble with my camera, but I think everything is good now. So I'm in my computer. Thank you, Aisha, for coming today. We are really excited to listen to your story, and thank you everyone for tuning in. This is like a dream to me. I really love that series, and I want to share a timeline with you guys just so that everyone knows how this storytelling, clinical reasoning session is gonna go. So I'm gonna share my screen here. 1 second. Okay. Can you see it? Yeah, so we'll start with introduction, which is what we're doing now, self-presentations, contextualization, and the timeline that I'm showing you now. Then we're gonna listen to Aisha's story, and we're gonna reflect on it, the human aspects of it, and just spontaneous reflections. And then we'll go to the teaching points, which will go through a diagnosis overview and share some clinical reasoning about the case and the diagnosis. And I want to invite you all to, throughout the whole session, just ask questions, share your comments or your own stories with us. So Aisha, without further ado, please tell us your story.
Okay, so that morning, I arrived at the hospital a little earlier than usual. Our team had just finished admitting patients from the medical emergency, and the house was bound to be full. The first patient I saw was a young man. I introduced myself and proceeded to ask him our usual morning questions while reviewing his file and writing down my notes. I noticed quite a thick file of papers at the table by his side, which surprised me considering how young he was and how relatively healthy he appeared. Medical records on this side of the world are still mostly handwritten. Though cumbersome, it is an opportunity to spend more time at the bedside. But I digress. He was admitted with diarrhea. This was one of his many admissions with the same complaint. After the professor had done his morning round, I sat beside him with a pile of notes and we talked for some time. I asked him, when were you last healthy? The answer to that question stretched over many years, and it involved him toggling from one healthcare service to another in search of a diagnosis. He found his answer a year back when he was diagnosed with Wilson's disease. Penicillamine was started, but then had to be stopped because of an episode of bone marrow suppression a few months back. He was taking zinc. Trientine was not and still isn't available in the country. He had evidence of cirrhosis, though he had not yet decompensated. His diarrhea improved and we planned to discharge him, but I had many concerns. First and foremost, if he could not take penicillamines and alternatives were not available in the country, he would worsen over time. I was unsure when to divulge that information, but I made sure he kept in touch and came for regular follow-up. Over the next few months, he had repeated admissions to the hospital, not unlike most patients with chronic liver disease. At one point, it was spontaneous bacterial peritonitis, then encephalopathy, and so on. He was always accompanied by his elder brother. He was married, had 4 kids, but I never met them. He used to work as an electrician, but work had become impossible due to his illness. In one of the family meetings, I had discussed the downward spiral his disease was bound to take. The undertone of these discussions was always that the patient himself should not be explicitly aware of his disease process. And so every time he asked me when he would get better, I did not have an answer. I took refuge in conventional words of hollow hope. What options did I have for a patient who had a treatable disease, but it is not treatable for him because he was unfortunate enough to have a side effect from one of the medications that precludes further use, because the alternative medication is simply not available, and because he's too poor to even consider a liver transplant. So just like that, his options were struck off one by one, and he was left at the mercy of this incessant process. Ultimately, it all culminated in one final admission, wherein he came with severe jaundice. This was acute and chronic liver failure due to untreated Wilson's disease. Unless a liver transplant is undertaken, this condition is uniformly fatal. I knew he was not going back home alive. He was in a lot of pain. He looked at me with hopes of a cure. I had nothing to offer. Pain relief in patients with cirrhosis is complicated in of itself, and the problem is compounded when a physician is trying to balance pain relief and CNS depression, or when you are in a setup where getting a hold of narcotics or sedatives becomes a real problem. Ultimately, I stopped looking him in the eye. It had become a lot. At one point, he asked me, "Why won't you help me? You have always helped me." I really had no answer. I wanted to sit beside him and tell him that you are dying. I wondered whether it would be an act of cruelty or an act of compassion. I wanted to give him privacy and dignity in death. I wanted him to meet his family one last time, his wife and kids, who never came to see him at the hospital because of numerous cultural constraints. He could have said goodbye. Even if I had the courage to do all this, I would have faced a mountain of protests from the family. As Muslims, we believe to Allah we belong and to Him shall we return. But we, in our imperfect humanism, still want to save our loved ones from the pain and fear of knowing that they are dying. I took care of him, but I realized my visits were shorter and less personal. I realized I was preparing myself for what was to come, protecting myself from what was to come. I was not ready to let go of a person that could have been saved. He died in agony. It could have been a better death. On our side of the world, We work in healthcare systems that are heavily dependent upon individuals. Sometimes a few physicians carry the whole burden of the state, and witnessing such senseless deaths is anything but rare. One thinks that one may get used to it after a while, but that does not happen. Each one hits you differently. Many days later, while reflecting on it, I contemplated our relationship with death. Awkward is how I would describe it. Death is common to all of us. We are walking towards it. It is our destination, irrespective of whether we believe in the afterlife or not. Then why is it so difficult to talk about? I may never know the answer to this. Patients such as these never leave us. They remain with us as they remain with their families. They expose the fault lines that exist in healthcare systems all over the world, systems that ensure that health remains a privilege and not a basic human right. For those who will listen, they tell us about this silent structural violence, as Paul Farmer describes it. They make us realize that the road to social justice is long and hard, and that we are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are we free to abandon it. They tell us that leftover grief is actually compassion that never fulfilled its promise. But I'm not without hope. As much as human beings hold the capacity to inflict infinite violence, human beings also hold infinite capacity for compassion. And more often than not, it is the one that does fulfill its promise.
Oh my God. Aisha, that was so beautiful. Like, I was expecting a beautiful story, but the way you just carried us through your feelings and your expectations and the patient's expectations and whatever went through your mind, like during the case, and so humbling and so powerful. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Umaima, would you like to ask the first question?
Thank you so much, Aisha, for this, for this beautiful story, for the way you shared it with us. I resonated with many parts of it. Things are quite similar in Morocco too. And yeah, thank you so much for putting yourself out there and share this powerful story. My first question to you was about the way you grieved these patients. How did you grieve these patients? How did you move on this loss? And let's take it one question at a time. Thank you, Aisha.
Thank you, Laura, for this opportunity. Actually, I haven't. While writing this down, I teared up a couple of times. It was difficult, especially as you said in the beginning. We do not have space to talk about these things. There just simply isn't enough time. When you are there, when you are seeing these patients, you know it's going to happen, but then there are 10 other things you have to do. There are 10 other patients you have to see, and the work is never ending. So there simply isn't enough time to discuss it with your peers, the consultants, the professors, the fellow residents, the interns who also go through the same thing. Everybody, because when the day that he passed away, I was not. I think it was Sunday, and I was not on call, and so I was not there when it happened. But the intern who was there, he told me it was really difficult for him as well. But there is really no space beyond that. And actually, when we talked about this, I thought it was an opportunity to really process the whole thing, and then get to the getting over part. Ultimately, these they will remain with you forever. These are the kind of patients. These are the kind of stories. They never leave you. They are always there with you. So, but this is the beginning. So.
I have never had a patient who died, especially because my first rotation is going to start tomorrow. So I haven't had that many patients in my life, but I can imagine that whenever you connect that way with a patient and they end up dying, they will probably be with you forever, like you said. I would like to ask you, how do you deal with the frustration, like with the frustration of not being able to relieve his pain, or with the medication that you wouldn't have access to it? How do you just I don't know, like you don't give up, but there is nothing that you can actually do. So what do you do in that case?
Usually it's a discussion with the caretakers, with the family of the patient, and you tell them, okay, ideally this would be the path to go. Ideally, I would like to do this. Ideally, we know that he's going away and he should not be in any pain right now. It's not important that he's awake and alert and talking to you. What is important is that his comfort is important. But then we have these constraints, and once you share that space with the family about not being able to do these things because of this problem, it becomes easier, because then you know that there is no blame on their part, because sometimes it's an administration issue, right? So there is so much misuse of narcotics in the hospitals as well, over here, and it's not regulated, that it's not freely available. And so and most of the times they are aware of these problems. These patients, they come and go so many times to the hospital. They are so back and forth that they realize these issues. But once these feelings and these frustrations are out there in the open in the form of words, it does make it better, though it never goes away, because you always have that thing at the back of your mind that, this could have been better.
Definitely. I actually, when I first read your story, because you sent me beforehand, it made me think of something that I go through as a severely ill patient's relative. And so I wanted to share with you guys, if that's okay, my view, not as a medical student, but as a patient's relative. My father has been through 1,000 doctors' appointments and hospitals. And when accompanying him to one of his appointments, I was noticing the way his doctor's eyes, like the look that she had when she was looking at him, and saying that she knew he had had a rough year with rapidly worsening symptoms, and that it must have felt awful. And when she did that, she wasn't just addressing the disease course. She was showing empathy towards my father's journey up to this point. And after that, like by the end of the conversation, she asked if my mother and I, if we had any suggestions or questions, or if we talked to another doctor that thought of something that she didn't at this point. And so it made me think that when I think of severely ill patients, I think of three things. First, taking care of the relatives, as you said, just being honest with the possibilities and with what you can do. And second, being aware of the patient's journey. And third, just looking for other professionals' perspectives and insights, because maybe they can think of something that we didn't. We now as healthcare providers, not as family. And yeah, I wanted to share that with you. Umaima, do you have any other questions?
Thank you so much, Laura, for sharing your personal story with us. I don't have really, it's not really a question, but more of a reflection. Dr. Aisha shared how when she learned that if her patients cannot have access to Trinitin, I guess. She knew that he was gonna pass away, that he already felt his penicillin treatment, and he can't afford, or the next best option for him is not available. I too can still relate with that part, because here in Morocco too, once we learn in textbooks and in school that we should share all the information we have with the patients, and they have every right to know what their current medical situation is. But I found myself many times in the ER with the relatives of a patient who knew they have terminal cancer, but they withheld that information from him, and they would ask us not to tell them. So I know, like, ethically, from what we learned, it's not correct to withhold that information from them. But at the same time, I see where the family is coming from. There isn't much for them to do, and you're just protecting them and protecting whatever little time they still have. I want to know, what are your thoughts on this? Where it's not like binary. There is so much, there's a big gray zone. We don't know which one is the right thing to do, which one is not. So what are your reflections on this? And after this patient passed away, do you regret not telling him beforehand to what was like the outcome he had? Thank you, Aisha.
Yes, thank you, Maima, for the question. I actually was so curious about this question that you asked. I had this, I don't know, weird tendency to make a questionnaire and just distribute it among the residents and ask them, if you have, for example, a diagnosis like that, would you want to know? I mean, and I think it was a very sort of a dark question, but this episode, this was on my mind for weeks. Like, I couldn't get out of that dark. I couldn't stop thinking about death, and I couldn't stop wondering what I asked myself, would I want to know? I mean, if I have a terminal illness, I don't know, maybe down the line, would I want my doctor to come and tell me that you're dying, or would I just want to, not know that information? So for me, I completely understand where the family is coming from. I don't judge them on that aspect at all. But yes, I would have liked to tell him, because sometimes there are things that you might want to do in those last few days, last few hours. For me, that was important, the goodbyes and the last few days. Also, to just address Maddie's question she asked in the chat, I think it was not a positive impact on my future experiences with the patients, because I stopped. I tried to not get involved that much, and I tried to stay a bit away from, because with patients like these, you get to know them so well. You may joke around with them. You may try to make them feel a bit better, but I tried to avoid that in the future, because then ultimately it doesn't help your objectivity. But I hope there's another way around it. There's another way to experience this. But with this, it was mostly negative.
It is interesting to know that, like, for me, when I think of a special bond with a patient, I think that I would think that it would mostly impact on a good way for further relationships like that. But it's important to just pay attention to our own feelings when other cases like that just appear, because like, it's easy to just be afraid of feeling that way again, not like being attached to them, but being just frustrated and sad whenever something happens and they pass away. And so we can maybe just shut ourselves. And I'm really, this is something that I'm really afraid of happening, just having this traumatic experience. And whenever I encounter new opportunities of connecting, then I cannot do that anymore. Do you feel like that? Like this is gonna be harder for next encounters?
It may be, but let me tell you that even though I tried not to get attached to patients, it's not an attachment, it's just, taking care of them. But it did happen even after that. You do care about, and spaces like these, I think they go a long way, because if you have a space like this where you can express your feelings and you can try and get over them, I think it would affect the next interaction positively instead of, affecting it negatively. Considering the burden of patients that we all deal with, it's bound to happen. And sometimes that burnt out phase does come, where you are taking care of patients, but in like a more mechanical way. So I think this project is really helpful, and it should help a lot of physicians who are dealing with situations like these, because it's inevitable. It will happen to every one of us.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. Actually, I would like to talk a little bit about palliative care, because a couple of days ago, I was reading a document created by the International Association for Hospice and Palliative Care to redefine palliative care, focusing on the relief of serious health-related suffering. And what they say is basically that palliative care is the active, holistic care of individuals across all ages with serious health-related suffering due to severe illness, and especially of those near the end of life. And it aims to improve their quality of life, their families, and their caregivers. And the definition includes other bullet points with additional details and recommendations for governments to reduce barriers to palliative care. And I found an infographic created by World Health Organization in 2019 that I would love to share with you guys. Can you see it? So it focuses on improving access to palliative care. We're not going to go through the whole document. Ugh, wait a minute. How do I make this? Okay. I just want to focus here, the gaps. What are the gaps? 86% of people who need palliative care do not receive it. 83% of the world's population lack access to pain relief. 98% of children needing palliative care live in low and middle income countries. And so here they highlight the barriers. And here's what you went through, Aisha, I believe: overly restrictive regulations for opioid pain relief. Like, you are not the only one. So other barriers would be poor public awareness of how palliative care can help, and cultural and social barriers such as beliefs about pain and dying, and insufficient skills and capacities of health workers. And so here they say that they created this resolution in 2014 that focuses on integrating palliative care into national health policies. And they suggest that countries revise laws and processes to improve access to opioid pain relief, and include palliative care in the training of healthcare workers, and provide palliative care services, including through primary healthcare centers and homes. And I wanted to share that with you because first, to tell Aisha that this is not something that she went through. Like, this happens throughout the globe. And I wanted to just tell our global audience that those documents, they exist. They have suggestions for governments, but they will just be content shared online if healthcare workers are not, like, do not engage, if we are not loud about changing the situation. And so, like, this is something that we need to do, like, in the whole world right now, because the numbers are just scary. And I really wanted to bring that reflection to our conversation today. Umaima, do you have any other questions or reflections that you would like to share before we dive into the clinical reasoning? Or anyone else, please share your questions or comments.
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura, for sharing all these documents. The numbers are indeed scary, and palliative care should really be taught in the medical curricula. I have an extra question for Dr. Aisha concerning her view on empathy. I too see empathy as a finite resource that we only have like a certain amount of, and it keeps getting eroded. I read a paper about how like lack of sleep and burnouts erode your empathy, but in some specific contexts, like in many hospitals in low and middle income countries, there is another like aspect of the healthcare system that erodes our empathy. It's you knowing that there is something that you can do for these patients. It's a STEMI patient or stroke patients who come within the thrombolysis window, but you just can't help them. It's patients like the story that you shared with us. And I think this particular aspects of, and this particular frustration really erodes our empathy and our ability to relate to our patients a lot. And I'm really afraid that in a few years, I will run out of it, or I will find it hard to aid for my patients, like, because somehow I will shut down to protect my mental health. How do you think we can like protect ourselves while also preserving this like finite resource we have of empathy, and without like getting our hearts broken every day at the hospital? Thank you.
I love your question, Umaima. It's let me tell you something. We differentiate this. One is empathy and one is compassion, right? So empathy is getting into their shoes, feeling their pain, feeling their desperation and their frustration, and you feel all of that as well. And compassion is understanding their pain, but then being able to do something about it. The next question for compassion is, how can I help? And that's where actually that's where we are stopped, right? In our countries, because we say, how can I help? And there are ways that we can help, but it's sometimes beyond our means. And so what I would suggest is that you can empathize with them without running out of this. Because you have to understand the constraints of your particular situation. And let me tell you something, we have this, you must know as well, in countries like ours, as I also narrated in the story, sometimes there are single physicians who just carry the whole burden of the system, right? So we have those examples here. And we have a physician who actually made a whole kidney transplant institute for patients. And I interviewed him back when I was in medical college, and I interviewed him and I asked him, how did he do this? And he said, I saw a space, I saw a need, and I just fulfilled that need. And I understand that not everybody can do this, but he said he's not alone. He has a whole team that has worked with him and that has made this thing possible. But when we think about our situations and we say, okay, I will go beyond my duty, beyond what is required of me as a resident physician or as an intern, I will go beyond my duty and help this patient. That ultimately does not help the system. That ultimately takes the responsibility off of the system. And the system is then, it doesn't feel that responsibility anymore. So I do not encourage that you go beyond your duties as a resident physician and try to help patients beyond what your duties are. that is one thing that would help you not have this, your empathy or your compassion erode. Because if you go beyond for every patient, you will ultimately burn out. So in our circumstances, most of the times we do feel depressed and we do feel frustrated. But the way to go about is to understand and internalize your limitations. And then within those means, try and help within what your duty tells you to, and not go beyond that. Ultimately, the systems then you lessen their responsibility if you try and do that. I think everyone must have heard of Paul Farmer, right? He was the person who founded Partners in Health, who recently passed away. And I was reading his book, Pathologies of Power, and he discusses exactly this thing about how we can help in lower middle income countries. And he talks about three things. One is charity, then is development, and then is social justice. And he tells us how charity and development are actually in the long run detrimental, and how steps towards social justice are what should be done to try and bridge this gap between healthcare.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aisha.
Thank you, Aisha, so much for your story, for your reflections and answers. And now, if nobody has any other questions, we'll dive into some clinical reasoning. And I'll share a whiteboard with you. I'll focus on clinical manifestations and pathogenesis of Wilson's disease. But Aisha and Umaima will also share their thoughts and pearls with us as we go through it. Okay, so just share my screen one more time. Okay, so this is what we'll go through. It seems like a lot, but we'll do it in parts. It'll be fun. Let me make it big. Yeah. So Wilson's disease is also called hepatolenticular degeneration. And we'll start here in number 1. Is it, can anyone answer me if you can actually see it?
We can see it. It looks great. Yeah. This is amazing.
Thank you. I'm excited. Okay, so Wilson's disease, it is a genetic disorder of copper metabolism. It is actually an autosomal recessive pattern of inheritance that leads to impaired function of the intracellular copper transporter ATP7B. And we'll just go through how that happens. So I'll tell you how it should be, and then we'll see what actually happens with those patients. So copper is absorbed in the stomach and duodenum and binds to circulating albumin, and then is taken up by various tissues. And excess copper is excreted into the bile, where it ends up as fecal copper. So within the hepatocytes, copper is incorporated into apoceruloplasmin, and then it turns into ceruloplasmin that is then secreted into the bloodstream. So what happens in Wilson's disease is that there is decreased incorporation of copper into apoceruloplasmin and decreased transport of copper from the liver into the bile, leading to copper excess in tissue, despite the low circulating levels of ceruloplasmin. And so there is hepatocyte injury and from copper and extrahepatic copper deposition. And so we'll just follow that arrow here. Copper accumulation of copper leading to clinical features. So we have 3 main organs that are affected: the liver, the brain, and the eyes. So the liver disease progresses silently, ranging from asymptomatic to biochemical abnormalities to acute hepatitis and acute liver failure, which is what Aisha's patient went through. And it is associated with Coombs negative hemolytic anemia, chronic hepatitis, and cirrhosis. So we'll go here for the TGI symptoms. The patient could be asymptomatic, have abdominal pain, jaundice, hepatomegaly, splenomegaly, ascites, upper gastrointestinal bleeding, peripheral stigmata of chronic liver disease. But I really want to highlight jaundice because it is associated with acute liver failure with hemolytic anemia. And so zooming in, Coombs negative hemolytic anemia, it is Coombs negative means that it is not an immune autoimmune hemolytic anemia. So the typical find include increased reticulocyte count that is compensatory, high LDH and indirect bilirubin, and low or undetectable heptoglobin. And the association with acute on chronic liver failure is that hemolytic anemia in that case results from the effects of excess copper ions in the RBC membrane in the circulation due to hepatic copper release following cellular necrosis. And so we'll just go back here for our neurologic manifestations, which fall into 4 main categories: dysarthric, dystonic, tremulous, and Parkinsonian. Dysarthric is the most common neurologic manifestation. And we also have to remember psychiatric manifestations, the most common one being depression. Also important to remember that the patient could have altered mental status due to hepatic encephalopathy, which I don't know if I'm mistaken, but I think Aisha's patient also presented with. So here in neurologic manifestations, just zooming in a little bit. So dysarthria is the most common, and the types include ataxic dysarthria, which is irregular word spacing and volume, or the speech may be attitoid or hypophonic or spastic. Dystonia could present in many ways. It could be generalized, it could be unilateral, it could be focal. In case of being focal, it could be blepharospasm, which is the one with the eyes, or cervical dystonia, which is torticollis, writer's cramp, or dystonic facial expression, which gives you that weird smile. And the tremor also could present in a lot of ways. It may resemble essential tremor, intention tremor, postural tremor, and unilateral rest tremor. The classic tremor associated with Wilson's disease is a wing beating tremor, but it's not the most common one. And it is a low frequency, high amplitude tremor that is most prominent when the patient is just with the arms held like outstretched laterally. And just a little bit of imaging information is that simultaneous involvement of basal ganglia, thalamus, and brainstem is highly suggestive of Wilson's disease. Oh my God, I'm sorry. Wait. Okay, so now for the eyes. This is my actual favorite part. The Kaiserflesh rings. They are brownish rings that appear to encircle the iris of the eye due to deposits of copper in the Descemet's membrane in the cornea. And they are thought to reflect copper within the CNS. Why? Because up to 98% of patients who present with neurologic manifestations present with Kaiserflesh rings also. So, and when the therapy is started, when they start therapy, the rings start to disappear. So it's really, really interesting. And with the patients that present with the hepatic symptoms, only 50% of them have Kaiserflesh rings. And okay, so the last pearl that I want to share is just when to suspect. Any patient with unexplained liver, neurologic, or psychiatric abnormalities, or in a first degree relative of a patient with Wilson's disease. And it's important to remember that the age of diagnosis is usually from 5 to 35 years old, mean age being of 13 years old. And children and adolescents and adults, they present in different ways. Children usually present with hepatic manifestations, while adolescents and adults present with neurologic manifestations. So yeah, this is what I wanted to share. I would love to know what Aisha wants to share with us about her clinical reasoning on this case.
This was awesome, Laura. I love the infographic. Just about acute liver failure on top of, Wilson's disease, because about 20% of these patients will present with those with hepatic manifestations. So about 20% of them will present with acute liver failure. And in that, it is very important because if it is not treated, it is uniformly fatal, right? So you have to go for a liver transplant. And the best way to diagnose it, there was a study done in which there are 2 tests, which when done serially are 100% specific and sensitive for the diagnosis of acute liver failure due to Wilson's disease. And those are, you have a ratio of alk phos over bilirubin, right? Total bilirubin. And if that is less than 4, and I hope I'm not wrong. I always forget this, but yes. And then there's AST over ALT. So that ratio, that should be more than 2. Yeah. So this was something that I wanted to share because these are just simple tests that we do in every patient. And if you just take out those ratios, and if they suggest this, then they're quite sensitive and quite specific. So you make a decision as soon as you can. Let me just confirm it from this. Yes, it's alk phos over total bili of less than 4, and then AST to ALT of more than 2.2. I will share the source as well in the chat. And there was something else that I wanted. Yes, so for the in the same families with Wilson's disease, with a strong history of Wilson's disease, different family members may present differently. So for like my patient, one of his brothers was, while he was being treated with us, one of his brothers was diagnosed with neurological Wilson's disease. So he actually presented with really frank Parkinsonism, and that there is this phenomena of paradoxical worsening once chelation is started in these patients. So, for example, they present with Parkinson's disease, and then you start them on either penicillamine or trientine, whatever is available. And after some time, their neurological symptoms may worsen, and the cause of that is not really known, but that sometimes happens. And improvement or betterment starts to happen within the hepatic manifestations in about 6 months. And for the neurological, it may take up to 18 months to 2 years, somewhere around that time. And screening is very important. So family should be screened, kids should be screened, all those who have, patients who have. So yeah, I think those are some of my pearls.
I love that. Really important to remember that different family members can present with different manifestations. And thank you, Aisha. I love it. Umayma, what would you like to share with us?
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura, for the infographic. You did a wonderful job. I've seen the infographic before, and it still gets me. It's very beautiful. Thank you. And thank you, Aisha, for the pearls. The things I learned with you guys is how after you start patients on penicillamine or some copper chelation agent, the Kaiserflesh ring also disappears. I did not know that. I thought that once it's there, it's going to be there for as long as it takes. And the acute on chronic liver failure. I had one extra question, but Aisha touched on it lately, like at the end of her answer. it was how like the Wilson disease is an autosomal recessive disorder, and did the kids of these patients get genetic screening or genetic counseling on the disease? And if yes, what do you think will be the what do you think they will be offered before the symptoms onset?
Great question, Umayma. I will admit that I do not exactly know the answer to this question. I think that they must have clinical manifestations to be started on treatment, for them to be started on treatment. And because it does not manifest, for example, this patient had 4 kids, so we are not expecting that all 4 of them would be having this problem. So, but we will screen them with a 24-hour urinary copper, and because genetic screening is not available, so we have to depend upon these tests. And if they start to develop, I will look this up and I will give you the proper how we go about it. But I think that if they start developing signs and symptoms of accumulation of copper, then treatment should be started. For the first line treatment that we have is penicillamine, which is a chelating agent. Zinc is sometimes used in pediatric patients, but it should be like a joint decision between gastroenterologists and pediatricians, because zinc is only something that stops the absorption of copper from the gut. It does not actually get rid of the copper that has already accumulated in the liver or in other organs. So it may prevent further accumulation, but it may not help the symptoms or signs or symptoms, or it may not help the liver injury that is happening. So the decision has to be made with the help of, with a multidisciplinary approach. And then we have trientine, because penicillamine has a lot of side effects, including bone marrow suppression. Sometimes patients will have nephrotic syndrome as well from this. So trientine is another option, sadly not available in Pakistan, but yeah, that's a second chelating agent. I think it's first line probably in some guidelines.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I think we're getting close to the end of the session. I want to thank again everyone for being here with us. I would love to know your opinion on this new format. Please give us feedback through Twitter or something like that. We would love to know if you enjoyed, if you had fun, if you learned with us. I definitely learned a lot from Aisha, from Umayma. Thank you so much. If you don't have any other questions, Umayma, do you have anything else? Or Aisha, would you like to share any other reflections with us? Yes, no?
Laura, I have spoken too much today.
Not at all.
If somebody else has any feedback, then I think we would love to hear that.
I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say that we could have listened to you for an extra 2 or 3 hours. It was like a medical and social and philosophical discussion, and we all enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Aisha, and thank you, Laura, for putting this together. It's a pleasure to work with you. And for everyone who joined us today. I know this is very different from what you're used to on VMR, but we're getting the hang of it, and we will do our best to improve it and for this to become a hopefully monthly tradition.
Yes, I'm really excited. I love the opportunity of making this happen with such an incredible team. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you soon. Bye.